What's up, folks? Maximilian here, and welcome back to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, The Online Warrior Season 2, Episode 28. In the previous episode, I had a pretty historic moment in the sake of this series. I finally reached High Lord, and for all the guys that came along and gave me well wishes or thanks, I really appreciate it, and for anybody that's been sticking along with the Marvel scene, it's still pretty good. It's changed quite a bit, and there's not as nearly as much people following as it used to, but Marvel is still really exciting, and you can expect a lot more out of this channel. I know a lot of folks might be like, oh my god, there's all this Injustice stuff, but to be honest, Injustice is really hot right now, and I'm having a lot of fun with it, learning new characters and learning the variety of the system mechanics and all the stuff that is with a new fighting game. It's also one of those, like, comic book fighting games, similar to Marvel vs. Capcom, and a lot of people seem to get really attached to certain characters, and I'm kind of that way when it comes to Batman, so I'm really enjoying it and I'm having fun. Regardless, getting into the topic of this week's episode. Last week we were talking about playing lame and getting to High Lord, but there was something that happened over the past week at NorCal Regionals that caused quite a bit of controversy in regards to high-level players and the systems that they're playing on. I would not have normally made a topic about this, but I'm not going to talk specifically about the drama that happened or the ensuing drama. I don't really want to go too much into that, although I'll briefly cover it so you guys can understand where these people are coming from. What I do want to discuss is how do we move forward from this, and what can the Marvel scene possibly do to make things a little bit better. So the big issue for you guys that don't know, at NorCal Regionals, they were all playing on PlayStation 3 consoles. A lot of these players didn't seem to have many issues, but there have been issues with the PlayStation 3 version of fighting games in the past when it comes to Capcom. I can kind of summarize it with Street Fighter 4. There was, I believe, 1.5 or maybe 2 frames of delay. Don't quote me on that. I know it was at least 1 frame of delay. It did feel a little bit different than the Xbox 360 version. And when it came to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, I think it had a similar result as far as, like, input delay. There was, like, 1 frame of delay. And this is all in comparison to the Xbox 360 version. And a lot of people might be asking why that is, and it's pretty much because the games were designed on Windows hardware and then ported over to the PS3 architecture, which is a lot different with its processor. And this causes odd things to happen sometimes. The NT Framework engine that actually runs Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and other games like Lost Planet, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, and so on, ends up doing extremely well on Microsoft hardware because it's based on a Windows platform. And when it goes to the PlayStation version, a lot of the time, most of the time actually, I think this is the case for the majority of games, end up running better on Xbox 360 in comparison to PlayStation 3 when it comes to things like frame rate and stuff like that. And in tournaments in the past, there has been issues with Marvel 3 running on PS3s. This is kind of going to talk about the defining system you're going to have to look for to try to play this game on at an ultimate competitive level, because a lot of competitive guys, as far as like pro-level tournament players, have complained about the PS3 version of this game for quite some time, and it never really came to me that I should make a topic about this because it was kind of here in between, and now it became like an issue where a multiple amount of top players, including like Chris G and Filipino Champ, were saying that there were issues going on with the PS3, and stuff was happening while they were playing that they were associating with the console as a reason why they were losing. And there's a bunch of drama that happened as a result of that in regards to the players' performances and things like that. But Chris G didn't end up winning NorCal Regionals, so he made proper adjustments if there was some to be made. But the biggest issue is that the PS3 has had issues with Marvel 3 engine because of it running on NT Framework, and NT Framework just runs better on Xbox. The visual differences are the fact that the PS3 a lot of the time has overheating issues, and especially during tournaments when the system is actually running 24, not 24 hours a day, but many hours a day, like at least over 10 hours a day, pumping out match after match after match after match. There seems to be issues when it heats up, and on certain stages especially there will be slowdown, like ridiculous slowdown on only select stages. So whether or not this is a problem directly associated with overheating or how the game was programmed or designed for the system, it's really hard to say, but it's a problem. It ended up being a problem for many players, and a lot of people have complained about it since then, especially the fact that at Evolution 2013, 2012, and EVOs in the past, these games run on PS3. PS3 is the system that is hosted to run all these huge level of competitive tournaments. And a lot of guys still play on Xbox. The Xbox version does not seem to have that many issues on the surface. However, I did some research, and there were some guys that on NeoGAF that were talking about this in a topic, and they shared some information with me on a Japanese website that actually goes over very distinct differences between Marvel 3 on the PlayStation 3 and Marvel 3 on the Xbox, so we can kind of get a better understanding of which ones do we want to play on. The biggest difference between the two, as far as graphic capability and as far as maintaining like smooth frame rates and things like that, which are very, very, very necessary in fighting games, was the fact that the Xbox 360 maintained a higher frame rate throughout most of play, while the PlayStation 3, this is around 60 frames a second, while the PlayStation 3 dropped about 8 frames in its overall average. So the PS3, I think, ran an average between like 53 to 55 frames per second, and the Xbox 360 ran very close to 60. Now, how much is 5 frames per second going to affect your gameplay, you might ask? Well, not that much. The human eye has a very, very, very difficult time discerning the difference between 45 frames per second and 60 frames per second. It's only around between like 30 and 40 you see a difference, but when you get 45 and beyond to 60, those look extremely similar, and the biggest thing you actually see the difference with, or notice the difference with, is in playing, is actually pressing the buttons, so that's not entirely a huge issue most of the time. However, this seems to be a bigger issue down the line when the system actually heats up with PS3 Slims and stuff like that. And things aren't a complete gravy train for the Xbox either. The Xbox did have similar issues, but not in the frame rate end, but with screen tearing, and in fact the Xbox version suffered about 15% screen tearing during the time of them actually testing. What is screen tearing, you might ask? Well, it's when the image on the screen is moving a lot, and you get this odd tear in the graphics. It looks like the game isn't actually putting the puzzle pieces together on the screen, if you know what I mean. This isn't exactly horrible for gameplay. It's a very bad visual thing, and it looks really, really, really weird on certain consoles. But the thing is, I don't think this happens a lot in the game. You see a lot of screen tearing in first-person shooters and stuff like that, but not in Marvel 3 as much, because a lot of the time, what do you have in a fighting game? You have two characters in not taking up that much part of the screen, and you have like a static background for the most of the time with very minor moving objects. There's not a huge amount of movement. It's not like your character is doing a 360 spin in a shooter or a third-person shooter or something like that. It's not that bad. Where you do experience a lot of screen tearing, if this is an issue for you, is things like cinematics, is when the camera goes out from its normal position, zooms in on characters while they're doing all this crazy stuff. That is where you're going to experience a bit of screen tearing in the Xbox version, and you're not going to experience that in the PS3 version. Those are the technical differences between these two games, that as far as a graphical level, Xbox version's got some screen tearing, but the PS3 version loses a few frames. Now, what has happened over the competitive environment when it comes to the PlayStation 3 version and the Xbox version, a lot of the competitive guys always play on Xbox, which is probably not the best way to go about it. They should stick to PS3 because what happens in the majority of tournaments, especially the big ones, they all run on PS3. And the reason these guys have selected this is also the reason that I usually primarily play Xbox 360 fighting games, or games on my Xbox instead of the PlayStation 3, is because not just of these little technical limitations, these things aren't that, important to me. Only sometimes they might really bug me if I'm on a very critical match. But for the most part, the online and the actual connection quality of the Xbox 360 seems to be better than the PlayStation 3 from my experience. I actually get the same game on both Xbox and PlayStation, and which game I end up trading in or something like that down the line really depends on which one has a better, capable online environment, and I have not really run into one fighting game that runs better on runs better on PS3 than Xbox. Then some people have actually told me Skullgirls is actually significantly better on PS3 and Xbox, so there is an exception. That is my biggest reason for primarily playing on Xbox, even though I still take my time and play with the PlayStation 3 guys as much as I possibly can. And a lot of competitive players gravitate towards the Xbox version for this reason as well. Not just the online, but it's just a much smoother experience and things along that nature. You don't really notice this screen tearing problem unless it's in, like I said, cinematics, and who cares if it's in a cinematic because, well, you're not controlling it, so big freaking whoop-de-doo. Now, this shouldn't be the final word or any gospel at all for competitive fighting games on PlayStation 3. It still runs it extremely well. It just runs into minor issues, and sometimes those minor issues end up being big issues in high-level competition. What you guys need to understand is that I'm not going to tell you to go buy the Xbox version directly or go buy PS3 version directly, because for the majority, the greater majority, I'm talking the 99% of players that play this game, you aren't going to run into these problems or notice that they're issues if you have the PS3 version of the game. You're not. These are things that are they're such big anomalies that happen in high-level play where every single frame counts, that these players notice this stuff. I was actually this way when it came to to Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. I was so accustomed to the arcade version of the game that the little differences between the Dreamcast version, which were actually very big in the long run, really bugged me. And there was other things between the Xbox version and playing the game on Xbox 360, and I could actually tell if there was a single frame of delay, and it bugged me. It bugged me to no end, and it took very long to get used to the game with having to deal with, like, this little frame of delay or an extra delay, and now I can play Third Strike Online, and I think it's freaking fantastic, and it plays wonderfully. But back in the day when I was playing arcade only, oh my god, dude, no exceptions, I can't do this, it's frustrating as hell, everything I've learned I have to throw out the window. And a lot of competitive guys are like that because they play in a specific environment all the time, and it's always the same. Things always being the same is very important, which is why a lot of people scoff at the fact of playing fighting games online, because playing a fighting game online does what? It leaves you in an environment where every single match has a variety of changes and differences between the last match or the next match. And that's one of the most difficult things about playing fighting games online, especially fighting games like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Injustice and stuff like that, is that its netcode is not a rollback netcode that's designed specifically to take your input delay away. No, in this game and like Injustice, like I was saying, these games have a delay. For a much smoother viewing experience, they sacrifice frame delay, which is kind of really annoying, especially when you fight guys across oceans. It's practically unplayable. But in some other environments, especially like Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, and even games like Skullgirls and Tekken Tag Tournament 2, Soul Calibur 5, these games do something with their netcode that is not to delay inputs, and it can be freaking awesome. I've actually played people across all of North America, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, all the way to Europe, and I was shocked at how good it actually played. So there is ways to make it good, but some games don't choose that path, and a game like Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is that. You literally have to make adjustments at the beginning of the round to try to figure out what do I need to do to try to delay my combos, because a lot of the time, even if you train under 2 bars, most connections are actually worse than that. So what is this going to tell us? That in the end of the day, don't worry about the PS3 version or the Xbox 360 version being, like, superior to the other one. They look practically the same. You'll need a fine-tooth comb and a giant microscope to actually see any difference in the graphics, and an even bigger frame microscope to understand the differences between each of the games on a competitive level. Don't worry about it, folks. If you are like me and you're playing the game online, you're going to run into frame delays all the time. The connection's going to be a huge variety of people. But if you are very competitive and you are looking for that competitive environment, the Xbox 360 version does run a bit better, but you run into a catch-22 because the PS3 version is used in the majority of large-scale major tournaments, especially ones like Evolution 2013. So it's some food for thought. You kind of have to take a look at each one, and whether or not you're specifically going for the competitive side or you just want to play the game online with a variety of people because you don't have a local scene or people to play against, if that's the case, I would say just get the Xbox 360 version. It's a bit of a smoother online experience. Not a ton, but it's a little better. If you guys have run into any weird anomalies with the Xbox 360 version or the PS3 version that will actually affect competitive play, I'd appreciate a comment below, because this is all based off personal experience and the things that people run into. And if you want to watch another video right now, check the top left annotation for a detailed guide on how to get the Batman Beyond costume in Injustice. And if you're looking for something more related to the fighting game tournament scene, the video at the top right is discussing pot splitting in the latest episode of Real Talk. My name is Maximilian, and I'll see you guys next week.